All right, I'm sure you guys are all aware, just because it's the biggest news in the guitar space right now, that Fender allegedly has sent a bunch of cease and desist letters to manufacturers who are making S-style guitars. And from my understanding of the situation, at least, it's all with the idea that they're trying to reclaim the Stratocaster body shape as their own property, so that then only Fender and anyone who would be authorized by Fender, like Charvel, for example, because Fender owns Charvel, can make a Stratocaster or S style of guitar. Now, this is just really interesting, just the way this whole situation has kind of been unfolding. I've watched Phillip McKnight's video. I've watched all of Cordy's videos that he's putting out on the subject. And if you want to kind of learn more about the situation, they're great resources. I'll link them in the description down below, because we're not really getting into the nitty gritty of what's actually going on here. But because this is primarily a John Mayer gear channel, I just wanted to come on and kind of talk about how this could potentially impact the Silver Sky. You know, what I think is quite honestly the S style of guitar that has made the greatest impact in the guitar space in the past decade, at least since the Silver Sky came out. Now, everything I'm talking about in this video is just going to throw it out there, my own opinion. You know, allegedly Fender sent these cease and desist letters out there. So, you know, I'm just giving my take and kind of my opinion and thoughts on what is kind of going on in the space and what everyone really is talking about right now. Like Rhett Shell's made a video on it as well. Lots of people are talking about this. Now, in terms of Fender trying to reclaim the Stratocaster body shape, I definitely do get that to a degree. They're the ones who designed the Strat, that body shape, and I personally think it's the greatest body design for a guitar that's ever been made. That's just personally, I think the Strat is, you know, kind of it for me, at least, if I had to have only one guitar. But it definitely feels a little late now in 2026 for them to be kind of trying to do this at this point, since the Stratocaster was made all the way back in the 50s. I mean, had they done something back then and that no one else could do that exact body shape, then, you know, I'm sure we wouldn't be in this sort of situation. But now you have all these different manufacturers making Strat style of guitars that they seem to be going after. And at first, I didn't think that PRS would even be in the equation, because the Silver Sky, though I'm sure the people at Fender absolutely despise that guitar, and it's been just this massive, you know, bigger than a thorn in their side since the Silver Sky released in 2018. But the body shape, you know, it's not exactly a Strat body shape, right? It does have some different features to it, different design languages kind of used in there. Sure, it's a double cut single coil guitar, but at what point do you call it a Strat and what's kind of Fender's kind of design versus, you know, taking that design and then elevating it or making changes? At what point does it become different? And that's where my headspace at least was when it came to the Silver Sky. However,
any with me, but it seems that Phil McKnight has confirmed that some of the big guys have also been hit with this cease and desist, and this might be the way out of this. So it sounds like PRS have been hit with a cease and desist.
And they hit everyone who sells on Thomann. So I believe Thomann was also served. It looks like the big guys were served too. So the PRS guys and maybe like, maybe even Ibanez. We don't.
But it was hearing that made me pause and go, oh wow, could this actually eventually even escalate to affecting PRS and the Silver Sky? Because, you know, John Mayer gear channel very heavily focused on, quite clearly, I think at least, you know, the Silver Sky is a guitar that is very near and dear to me. And I really do appreciate John's design and take on a Stratocaster, let's be honest. So it's kind of something that's made me go, all right, like how could this actually affect the Silver Sky? And do I think that there's the possibility of this happening? And I'm not a legal expert. I don't really know, you know, the details, the ins and outs of, you know, what they would maybe, like Fender would consider to be, you know, exactly the Strat style of body and where those differentiating factors in terms of the design language and everything like that would be. My thing with the Silver Sky has always been in terms of, you know, when the guitar was released back in spring of 2018, a lot of people, you know, Fender hardcore fans were a bit upset that, oh, John's gone and made a PRS Strat style of guitar, you know, and it became one of the most controversial guitars, I think, of all time. It was pretty wild when that guitar released. My thoughts on it were that, you know, John had a very close relationship with Fender, and he's kind of talked about it a little bit and stuff like that. And you can do some reading, I think, between the lines at least, and how his relationship with Fender had kind of changed and he had left. You know, basically how the story seems to go is that John in 2014 ends his partnership with Fender. They end production of the John Mayer's signature Stratocaster. It's kind of some talk about how his relationship with Fender has changed. And then he ends up going on to form the Silver Sky in the partnership with PRS. And my kind of whole thoughts that have always been on this is that if, John had ideas, things he wanted to do with Fender and kind of creating something more than just his version of a signature Stratocaster, with different pickups, choosing his neck profile finishes, going beyond that to trying to modernize the guitar a little bit more. And Fender didn't want to do that. So then he leaves and goes to PRS.
I had an idea for a guitar, and this goes back about 10 years, a guitar that is sort of the future of the classic design. It was not going to work at Fender. They weren't going to be able, one way or another, to bring the vision that I had to life. Okay. So, not pissed off. I want to go to somewhere where they can bring the vision to life. And it made a lot of sense to go to Paul, because that's the guy who started the company. To be able to call the guy who started the company on the phone and talk directly about ideas and how to build them, that's good for you. That's good for anybody watching. Like, that's good to have an artist be able to call the guy who runs the company. I couldn't do that really at Fender because of reasons that it's musical chairs. I'm not talking shit. I never talked shit. It's just musical chairs. You don't know who to call. I get to call the guy whose name is on the guitar, and we get to build stuff together. That's too cool. And that's something that I appreciate, and that's something that anybody picking up this guitar or any other guitar in the future should appreciate, because it opens up the direct connection between the artist and the guy who designs the guitars, the guy who's still here, who can very directly make change happen with the guitar. Okay. So let's get into the guitar. Why did it take 2 years? It's striking a lot of people as sort of a farce that it took 2 years. Well, it's a game of inches when you deal, millimeters, when you deal with taking a guitar that is based off of the Strat. Again, this guitar is based off of the Strat. And I think if people understood that I'm admitting that, I'm saying, yes, I have played a Strat for such a long time in my career that it didn't make sense to me personally to look down and see a different shape, and I don't think other people would want to look and see a different shape. So here's the 3 places that you have to sort of stick in between. You want to remain classic to a design that's almost synonymous with electric guitar. You want to innovate in a certain way so that you see something new, and you also want to respect the language of design that PRS guitars have. So everything has to balance. This is all a game of balance. It's 2 years because of balance. So let's go into why you have to balance this stuff. Well, I didn't just go to Paul and say, I have this idea, make it for me or I'll go somewhere else. It was so much discussion. Guitar players know that you've got to lean your guitar up against the couch or the bed and be able to look at it from across the room and go, yeah, all right. There's a confluence of design that makes something, when every detail is right, you look at it and it becomes one thing. It's not just 6 tuners and 6 machine heads and 1 nut and 21 frets. It becomes one really great thing. Cars have it, art has it, certain Apple products, Leica cameras, you look at it and they become sort of objects of sort of visual kind of lust, So that was the thing, is we have to get the sound to sound the right way, the feel to be the right way, and you got to turn around after you put it in the stand and go, there we go. Okay, so is it a Strat with a PRS headstock? Well, it's not, and I'll tell you why. And I'm not saying this defensively, I think you might find this interesting. When you take this much meat out of the Fender pickguard shape, it throws the whole thing off. So as soon as you cut that, and I ask go for it. And by the way, go in Photoshop and just put a PRS headstock on a Strat and tell me how you like it. So you're missing all this stuff now. And now you have to offset that with the right thing. Now, let me show you something that's really cool. This curve here always it always looked old to me. You know, so part of this is, what would a guitar like this look like if it were made this year for the first time? I'm not sure that there would be a sunburst option. Like, I think in 2018, if the electric guitar had just come into prominence, you wouldn't see a sunburst. And that's why there's no sunburst in the first line of these guitars, is that I'm trying to look at this like, if this guitar was made for the first time, this type of guitar was made for the first time in 2018, would they offer a sunburst? I don't know, and I'm looking at it like, I don't see sunburst on other things. Back in 1954, you saw sunburst on radios, televisions, cabinets. It's just not in the nomenclature. But what is are Tesla colors, and this is actually the red from the red they offer for Tesla. And that's in keeping with the modernized take on what a 6-string electric guitar would borrow from in 2018 if it had just started. So you lose this, and you have to redesign this, because this now, so look at this. It took forever to figure out when this was straight. Now, if you look at a Strat, the pickguard goes straight through in a line. The last thing we did to this before it was done, before I looked at it and said it's done, is that this had to curve. Technically, it doesn't make sense that it's not straight through. But if you had this sharpness here and this sharpness here, I mean, respect to Gene Simmons, but it looks like Gene Simmons. With the paint. With the paint. Love you, Gene Simmons, but that's what I'm saying. So, you also have this thing right here. And while we were looking at it going, how do you make this thing work? I went, oh, if you really want to balance it, make this the shape of this. So when you look at it and you go, wow, I like that for some reason, this is the mirror image of that. And that's what balances this out. Because this is a tall order when you change it. Okay, so why is it a 3 and 3 on a Strat body? And I think that that's Strat shaped body, Paul. I think that's why it's giving a lot of people pause, is that it's 3 and 3. Now, here's a fun story. When we started endeavoring on this guitar, we went out to the greatest industrial designers in the world. And they went on deep dives into the history of the headstock and all the different shapes, and what, based on all the different influences and all the different references, a headstock would look like today if it had 6 in a line. None of them worked. You would have looked at it and went, that's disgusting. And it was. But we tried. And one day maybe Paul will let me show you the things and you look at it and go, oh, got it. Wow. 6 in a line. So trying to get a Fender looking headstock without being exactly a Fender headstock is a daredevil situation on a design level. 99.9999% of those headstocks don't look right. So then I went, okay, let's go 3 and 3, and let's use the PRS DNA. So what's interesting is that this point and this point right here are the same on my hand as my 64. So I'm very familiar with that. The reason it's reverse as a headstock, and I remember the day I reversed it in Photoshop and sent it to Paul and Beverly Fowler, who's amazing at PRS, as an artist. She runs the artist relations, is because you have this point up here. If you had this point, this ends here and this ends here, and this was up here and this was down here, you'd have a whole top-heavy guitar. Everything would be like this, and everything on this side would be short. So, true to the old kind of vintage Fender thing, it would be elongated the most here. Now that's a design thing you can't get away from. The balance is, this is taller, this is shorter, so this has to be taller and this has to be shorter. And that all of a sudden balanced it out. That's when I looked at it and went, oh, this doesn't look like a platypus's foot or something. You know, it just wasn't looking like it had the thing. So we go with the mini birds. That's another thing. I wanted to be true to Paul's vision, you know, Paul's DNA. The bird thing is a genius design thing for the last 30 years, you know.
I've kind of always thought personally that, you know, well, kind of serves you right, Fender. Like, you should know that John is the biggest modern day guitar hero out there. He's a genius, not just in the way he approaches music and the guitar, songwriting and everything like that, but just in terms of his approach to a lot of other things. You listen to him talk, he's a very intelligent guy. And if he's kind of got an idea, why wouldn't you at least kind of explore that and, throw it out there. Let's see what happens. Sure, let's take a risk, right? And if that's what happened and Fender didn't want to do that, so that's kind of, part of the reason why he left, then I've always thought when it comes to Silver Sky, well, kind of serves you guys right. Good for John for, wanting to do this and going out there, and for PRS to actually be like, yeah, let's work together. Let's try and make something happen in terms of the Silver Sky. I've always been a big fan of that personally. And if it was, the exact shape as a Stratocaster, had a 6-sided headstock, you could kind of maybe be a little bit more like, all right, they're really just going on and, they're not really doing anything that's that new. However, I feel like the Silver Sky really did kind of push the boundaries in terms of, that Strat style of guitar and taking that vintage approach to that instrument, but then doing some like slight modernizations, the way they approach like the horn shape, for example, the locking tuners on the headstock, the slight, contours in the body shape, the input jack, just how it's raised up and things like that. Just little touches, but definitely make the guitar feel really good. And I think for a lot of people, they've connected with that guitar more than they would a Strat. Like at the end of the day though, if you want a Fender Stratocaster, the people who want that will probably go out and buy a Fender. That's what I've always assumed, and that's what I've done. I've had a few Silver Skies, but to me, I think it's the connection to vintage Strats for me that made me really want to go and pursue this, which is my own custom shop Sonic Blue Stratocaster. That's what I ended up landing on, and it's my number one guitar, and I love it very much. I still absolutely love and adore the Silver Sky, but I'm at a place where I only, at the time at least, wanted one really good single coil Strat style of guitar, and after owning a Silver Sky for a while and a couple different ones, I decided I want to go with a custom shop Strat that I can kind of spec out a little bit and kind of find what works for me and what I want. So that's what I've done. But I definitely think there was room for both the Silver Sky and the Fender Strat. That is for sure. And from, my understanding, at least, in the prototyping process of the Silver Sky, there was, kind of like talks, I guess, or whatever, of maybe doing like a 6-sided headstock. And that'd be really, very interesting to know what that would kind of look like. But they didn't even go down that route. They did the PRS headstock shape. Sure, they just, like the horns on top of the headstock, but they still kept so much of the PRS DNA in the Silver Sky. I can imagine that Fender would love the Silver Sky to not exist, but at the same time, I've always kind of felt like, well, maybe, if the opportunity was there or whatever, you guys could have worked it out with John. And then it would be the Fender Silver Sky, whatever they would have called it, right? So, it feels like some of this, to a degree, at least in my opinion, is kind of like this, at least with the Silver Sky. It's like Fender kind of put themselves a little bit in this situation. I don't know the full story. Certainly I wasn't there or anything for, what made John leave and everything to the creation of the Silver Sky. But it's kind of like at this point, John's gone and done his own thing. And then it leads into the question, okay, well, what is a Strat style of guitar? How far would Fender possibly want to go in terms of protecting that design shape? Is it any double cut body guitar that has 3 single coils, exactly where the input jack is, kind of the knob layout, a 5-way switch, who knows? Because I think personally, at least, the Silver Sky has certainly enough different branding differentiation from a Strat where people, I don't think anyone is going to go and confuse a PRS Silver Sky for this, this is kind of this is a Fender, right? Like, I don't think there's any mistaking that for that. I think at least in terms of what John and Paul Reed-Smith and the team at PRS have done with the Silver Sky has certainly moved it far enough away from a Stratocaster where, and I'd be interested, like from John Mayer fans of the Silver Sky, what you kind of think of this scenario and where this could possibly lead to. I hope, this doesn't really go anywhere and all parties kind of involved in this situation can come to a, mutually agreeable decision on, where we're going with this. Does it lead to eventually, if you want to make a Strat body exactly, you might have to pay Fender a bit of a licensing fee or something like that. I don't know, like, where does this go from there? But I think a world where you can only buy a S-type guitar from Fender, I personally think we're well beyond that. anyways, I just think the situation is interesting to say the least, and obviously looking at it from a John Mayer gear fan perspective, that's kind of where my mind went to, you know, beyond kind of the current situation and watching Phillip McKnight's video, John Cordy's videos as well. It's kind of like, okay, well, could we then, you know, eventually maybe hear about the Silver Sky being somehow affected by what is going on? I don't know. I just wanted to get my opinion, my 2 cents out there as to, you know, kind of this situation a little bit and kind of talk about the Silver Sky versus, you know, the Stratocaster and things like that. You know, I guess we'll just see. But like I've said, I just really hope that the situation kind of, you know, resolves itself and everyone can kind of walk away from this happy and, you know, like, yeah, I don't know. It's just crazy. But I'd be curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this in the comments down below. Like I've said, it's John Mayer Gear kind of focused channel. Could we see some changes with the Silver Sky or something happen? I have no idea. You know, I'm certainly not an expert in anything that is going on, but it'll just be interesting, you know, kind of see what happens. But personally, I love the Silver Sky very, very much. I think it's a fantastic instrument, and it's one that I definitely think there is room for in the space, you know, in the guitar space. I think there's certainly room for the Stratocaster and room for the Silver Sky to be on, you know, a guitar wall in a guitar store somewhere. I think there is more than enough room for that. And I think that's okay because these companies can push each other to build better products. You know, maybe PRS and John do something cool with the Silver Sky and that, you know, is an improvement or, you know, is something, you know, that people really like. And then Fender goes, oh, okay, we've never thought about it like that before. People seem to really like that. Why don't we offer something similar on, you know, a version of the Stratocaster, you know, just throwing something, you know, hypothetically speaking out there, you know, in kind of like just a general scenario. But I think that's, you know, healthy to have, you know, these companies trying to push each other to do better. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's all about being a fan of the guitar, a love for the hobby, making music, you know, whatever it is, however you enjoy the guitar. That's what, you know, you'd like to think it's all about at the end of the day. And at least, I don't know, I think there is room for a Silver Sky and a Strat to be on a wall at a guitar store together somewhere. So hopefully it doesn't come to that. But yeah, I just thought to come on and kind of, you know, just do a talking video, maybe a bit rambly, but, you know, just talking about the scenario and the situation and how it could affect, you know, the Silver Sky and John Mayer fans. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And yeah, have a great rest of your day, everyone. Take care. And hopefully I don't have to make a follow-up video to this one.
Anyway, go ahead and click the subscribe button if you like what you see.